Mia Taylor had never intended to live in the foothills of Northern California. She was a practical woman, not given to rustic fantasies about log cabins or sweeping mountain views. Her life had revolved around hard data, emergency protocols, and cold analysis. Years spent working in the state's Emergency Services Division had honed her instincts toward caution and preparedness. But when her older brother Mark passed unexpectedly last year, everything changed. He had been a wildland firefighter for most of his adult life, a stoic, stubborn man who understood the land and the dangers that came with it. They weren't close in their youth. Their careers had taken them in different directions. But as they grew older, an understanding had quietly built between them. Mark had chosen to live on the edge of civilization, in a sturdy single-story home on a sloped property nestled against the national forest boundary. The house was well-built, practical, and above all, ready for disaster. When Mia inherited the place, she hadn't planned on keeping it. But the more she went through Mark's things, the more she realized how carefully he had prepared the property, how thoughtfully he had structured everything to withstand the unpredictable. Wildfires, earthquakes, even extended power outages. There was one particular feature that caught her professional eye: a massive underground water tank, completely legal and permitted, installed over a decade ago when Mark first bought the house. It was cleverly disguised, the surface access hidden beneath a patch of native grass and a small reinforced hatch that fed into the fire suppression system around the house. It was not merely a rainwater collector or an aesthetic pond, it was a serious piece of firefighting infrastructure. 15,000 gallons of reserve water, regularly tested, gravity-fed, and fitted with standardized couplings used by CAL FIRE engines. In a region where municipal water pressure often failed under wildfire conditions, Mark had built this as his last line of defense, and for the neighboring homes as well. He had even registered its location with the county fire marshal, a detail Mia found in the carefully maintained emergency binder in her brother's office. At first, Mia considered selling the property. Her work in Sacramento kept her busy, and maintaining a house in the foothills was not in her plans. But the more time she spent there, the more she began to appreciate what Mark had built. Not just a home, but a small fortress of rational preparedness. And after what she had seen during her years in emergency management, homes lost, lives ruined because of basic infrastructure failures, she couldn't bring herself to strip the house down for sale. She decided to move in part-time, using the property both as a retreat and as a base for occasional consultancy work she now did with the private sector. The local community was a mixed bag. The area had developed rapidly in the last decade, where there were once only a few scattered homes and empty lots. Now stood rows of high-end properties, luxury vacation homes, and retirement villas. The influx of wealth had brought with it a certain kind of social order, codified through the neighborhood's Property Owners Association. Though technically voluntary, the association controlled nearly every aspect of community life, from mailbox styles to exterior paint colors to, more ominously, so-called landscape conformity guidelines. The current president of the association, Karen Maddox, was a polished, politically savvy real estate broker who had built her career on selling the image of this neighborhood as an exclusive, fire-wise enclave. She had a reputation for aggressive enforcement of aesthetic standards, and her influence over the more affluent residents was considerable. Mia had crossed paths with Karen briefly when she first took possession of the house. At the time, the interaction seemed cordial enough. Karen had welcomed her with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, and a brochure about community beautification initiatives. Mia, polite but wary, had declined to formally join the association, citing that her property, grandfathered from older zoning laws, was not legally obligated to comply with the latest aesthetic codes. Karen had nodded with thin-lipped acceptance, but Mia had noticed the way the woman's gaze lingered on the slope behind the house, where native grasses grew and where the discreet access hatch to the water tank was situated. At first, Mia thought little of it. She maintained the property as Mark had: clear defensible space, regular maintenance of vegetation, and meticulous upkeep of the fire systems. But tensions began to surface during a neighborhood inspection tour organized by Karen's board earlier in the summer. Under the pretext of documenting compliance with updated fire safety standards, a euphemism for aesthetic inspections, Karen and her committee members walked through the neighborhood, clipboards in hand, noting violations. Mia wasn't home that day, but upon returning she found a letter tucked into her front door, a notice of nonconformity, citing the existence of unauthorized industrial equipment visible from common areas. Mia's first reaction was irritation. The water tank, by design, was not visible from any public roadway. At most, the small metal hatch was detectable if someone deliberately trespassed past her marked property line and onto the rear slope. More troubling was the fact that the letter implied that the tank itself was somehow improper, ignoring the fact that it was a fully permitted fire safety installation, one that had been approved years before many of the current residents had even moved into the area. She drafted a terse but professional reply, attaching copies of the original permit documents and a note citing state fire code provisions that specifically encouraged such auxiliary water systems in fire-prone zones. For several weeks, she heard nothing further and assumed the matter was closed. But Karen Maddox was not one to let go of such things quietly. Over the following month, subtle pressures began to mount. Mia began receiving follow-up letters citing vague community concerns about land use compatibility. Contractors Mia had scheduled for routine maintenance began canceling appointments, citing sudden unavailability. Later, she learned through casual conversation with a neighbor that Karen's board had circulated an informal warning to service providers about non-conforming properties. Meanwhile, the association's newsletter began featuring articles about preserving the visual harmony of our unique mountain environment and the dangers of unregulated installations. The subtext was obvious. Mia, a seasoned professional accustomed to bureaucratic maneuvering, did not respond impulsively. She began quietly documenting each communication, consulting with a land use attorney recommended by a colleague, and making inquiries with the county fire marshal's office. The response from the marshal was unequivocal. The tank was legal, registered, and recommended. However, the marshal also warned her, off the record, that local associations often pushed boundaries when property values were at stake, and suggested Mia prepare for an uphill battle if the board escalated matters. That battle came sooner than she expected. In early August, while Mia was away in Sacramento on a consulting contract, she received a frantic phone call from a neighbor. Work crews, hired by the association, had arrived unannounced with heavy equipment and were dismantling the access fittings and pump connections from her water system. When Mia called Karen demanding an explanation, she was met with feigned confusion. "Oh, we believed it was an unpermitted hazard. Our legal team advised us to proceed." By the time Mia returned the next day, the site was gutted. The pump interface was gone, the hatch padlocked with a contractor's lock, and the slope scarred by the passage of machinery. Furious but controlled, Mia began the formal process of filing a complaint with the county sheriff and an emergency grievance with the fire marshal's office. But, as she knew all too well, the gears of official channels turned slowly. Meanwhile, the region was entering the peak of fire season. Weeks of triple-digit temperatures and dry winds had parched the landscape, and unknown to most of the residents still blissfully hosting wine tastings and garden parties, the municipal water system had been compromised. Mia had quietly confirmed through a former colleague that recent cutbacks in water pressure, a result of a new cost-saving contract engineered by the association's board, had severely impacted the neighborhood's firefighting capabilities. The combination of gutted private reserves and weakened municipal supply was a disaster waiting to happen, one that would soon arrive with terrifying speed, on a night when the winds shifted and the hills burned. The morning after Mia had filed her formal complaints, She awoke to an unsettling stillness. The air was heavy, unnaturally dry, and a faint, acrid scent of distant smoke drifted through the open window. It was late August, and Northern California was deep into what the firefighting community grimly called red flag season. Weeks of low humidity, tinder-dry vegetation, and winds that could turn a small spark into an unstoppable inferno in minutes. Mia rose early, methodically running through her daily inspection of the property, despite the lingering anger over what had been done to the water system. The slope where the tank fittings had been was a torn mess of churned soil and broken conduit ends. It had taken years for her brother to design that system, to get it approved and built, and now it had been crippled in a matter of hours by people who cared more about real estate aesthetics than the harsh realities of wildfire management. Still, Mia wasn't one to dwell in helplessness. She had already contacted a fire systems contractor to assess the damage and began drafting an emergency motion for a court injunction to prevent further tampering, though her attorney warned her it might take weeks to be heard. Later that afternoon, while reviewing emails in her brother's old study, her phone buzzed with a call from Chief Robert Latham of Cal Fire District 7, someone she had worked with years ago. His voice was tight. "Mia, heads up. We've got an active ignition about 12 miles northeast of your sector. Grass and light brush right now, but it's moving. No formal evac yet, but we're at Tier 1 advisory for your zone. I thought you'd want to know." Mia thanked him and hung up, her mind already running scenarios. The winds had shifted overnight, nothing too alarming yet, but if they veered southwest, the fire could chew through the intervening canyons fast. As the afternoon wore on, the wind began picking up. Dust devils curled along the driveway, and the sun took on that eerie, muted glare that seasoned Californians recognized all too well. Mia methodically double-checked her property, gutters cleared, propane tank shut off, backup generator tested. But the knowledge that her best line of defense, the tank her brother had insisted on, was now crippled, gnawed at her. It wasn't just her home at risk. The neighboring houses had been built close together, many with flammable landscaping and shake roofs, a point Mia had repeatedly raised in previous fire safety meetings to little avail. By early evening, she noticed an unusual amount of activity further down the road. 2 association board members and Karen herself were gathered near the front entrance, directing a group of private security contractors as they erected temporary signage about evacuation routes. Oddly, Mia hadn't received any official community alert about an evacuation drill, which under state protocol required coordination with Cal Fire and the sheriff's office. Sensing something amiss, Mia walked down to observe, maintaining a professional demeanor despite her simmering distrust. Karen spotted her immediately, her expression tightening. "Ms. Taylor, we're conducting precautionary preparations. The board has determined that proactive signage will help manage traffic should the need arise." Her tone was clipped, self-assured. Mia replied evenly. "Have you coordinated this with Chief Latham or the County Emergency Management Office?" Karen's smile was thin. "We have consulted legal counsel and deemed it within our rights under the Community Preparedness Initiative." It was a telling statement, one that revealed Karen was still operating in her parallel reality where optics trumped actual emergency protocol. Worse, Mia suspected Karen was attempting to preempt any official narrative, positioning the association as the community's primary authority in the event of a disaster. That could have catastrophic consequences if conflicting instructions led to confusion during a real evacuation. Returning home, Mia fired off an email to Chief Latham, detailing what she had seen. His response came swiftly. "No authorized drill or signage scheduled. Be advised, wind models now show increasing southern shift. We're escalating to Tier 2. Official notice coming." Within 20 minutes, Mia's phone buzzed again, an official text alert from the county. Tier 2 evacuation advisory in effect for her zone. She packed her go bag, loaded emergency files into her vehicle, and began notifying neighbors she trusted, many of whom had no idea the situation had escalated. By twilight, The scent of smoke was thicker. A faint orange glow flickered on the horizon ridge. Mia monitored the CAL fire scanner traffic, a steady stream of units being deployed north of the community. Then came a chilling transmission. Spot fires detected within 4 miles of the neighborhood boundary. The fire was moving fast, driven by a sudden gust front. Mia's training kicked in fully now. She double-checked her home's defensible space, left her exterior lights on, and moved her vehicle to face outward for a quick departure. Then she checked the hydrant at the street corner. No pressure. None. The association had signed off on a cost-saving water supply contract months ago, shifting much of the upper zone's supply to lower priority status during demand surges. The system had clearly failed under stress. Mia immediately called Latham. "Chief, it's Taylor. No hydrant pressure at my corner. I suspect the whole upper loop is dry." His voice came sharp. "Copy. We've had multiple reports. Are your tank systems operational?" The question hit like a gut punch. "They were sabotaged by the property board last week. I filed a grievance, but the system's disabled." A heavy pause followed. "Understood. We'll adjust tactics." "Stay mobile." As darkness fell, Mia received a text from her neighbor Paul, an older, retired firefighter. "Hearing talk about tank truck staging near the east lot. Board scrambling." Intrigued and concerned, Mia drove cautiously toward the lot. There she saw Karen, along with a contracted water hauling company she vaguely recognized from construction work, not equipped for emergency fire response. Karen was gesturing animatedly, arguing with the driver who looked increasingly agitated. Mia approached. "Karen, what is this?" Karen's expression soured. "We are facilitating emergency water supply staging in light of the current situation." Mia's professional instincts surged. "This contractor isn't certified for wildfire suppression support, and you have no authority to conduct independent water operations under a Tier 2 order." At that moment, the driver threw up his hands. "Lady, you didn't tell me this was an active fire zone. I'm pulling out. Liability's insane." He climbed into his truck and drove off, leaving Karen glaring. Mia locked eyes with her. "You've jeopardized this community's safety by dismantling permitted systems and replacing them with theater. If this fire crests that ridge, people will die because of these choices." Karen flushed but said nothing, retreating to her SUV. Mia didn't waste time. She radioed Latham with an update, then drove to Paul's house. Together, they reviewed old utility maps and spotted an abandoned agricultural tank at the far end of a former orchard property. It wasn't ideal, but it was something. If they could clear access, CAL fire engines might stage there. With the fire now 2 ridges away and the winds worsening, every minute counted. The fire was now less than 2 miles from the edge of the community, advancing faster than any of the initial projections had predicted. Winds had shifted again after midnight, bringing sudden gusts that pushed embers across containment lines. Mia sat in her brother's old truck with Paul, navigating the narrow back roads toward the abandoned orchard property where the agricultural tank was located. Her mind ran on instinct and experience. Years in emergency management had taught her that in chaotic conditions like these, unofficial resources often made the difference between disaster and survival. They reached the gate to the orchard just as the first tendrils of smoke began curling through the trees. The padlock was rusted, but Paul produced a set of bolt cutters and made quick work of it. Together they drove up the overgrown path, the headlights illuminating a clearing where the old tank still stood, weathered but intact, half buried in the hillside with visible access ports. It would need to be tested for contamination, but in an emergency, it was better than nothing. Paul climbed out and inspected the fittings. "We can make this work. If we can get CAL Fire to bring a portable pump, this tank could supply a couple of engines." Mia nodded, already on her phone. She reached Chief Latham directly. "Robert, we've got an old ag tank at the northeast orchard property, roughly 15,000 gallons. Location's clear, fittings are standard. You can stage a unit here." There was a pause, then Latham's terse reply. "Copy that. Dispatching Engine 237 and a portable pump team. ETA 25. They waited, tension mounting as the fire's glow intensified on the horizon. In the distance, sirens wailed and helicopter rotors thudded overhead. Paul wiped sweat from his brow. "If this works, we might hold the east flank. If it doesn't—" He didn't finish the sentence. Mia knew the stakes. This wasn't just about saving her own home. If the fire breached the eastern line, the entire upper loop of the neighborhood would be exposed. When the Sal fire crew arrived, the mood shifted instantly. Professional, efficient, they assessed the tank and began setting up the portable pump. Mia provided the location details from the old utility maps, helping them optimize the layout. Minutes later, water was flowing, tested quickly and deemed usable for exterior suppression. The crew chief gave her a nod of approval. "This will buy us some time." Word spread fast. Other neighbors, alerted by the activity, began arriving. Among them was Dan, a retired engineer who had built several of the older homes in the area. "I've got an old generator and lighting rig," he offered. "If we can set it up here, the crews can stage through the night." Mia agreed, coordinating with the Cal fire chief on scene. Meanwhile, back at the main entrance of the neighborhood, the situation was deteriorating. Karen, unaware of Mia's efforts, was still attempting to manage the optics. She had called an emergency board meeting via group text and was now live-streaming a statement on the association's private network, declaring that community leadership was taking all necessary precautions. In reality, the lower hydrants had begun to fail as well, with water pressure dropping across the entire system. Several homeowners attempting to wet down their properties reported little more than a trickle from outdoor spigots. By 3 a.m., the fire had reached the canyon mouth, less than a mile from the orchard staging area. Embers rained down intermittently, igniting spot fires that were swiftly suppressed by the engine crew. Mia worked alongside them, coordinating volunteers who arrived with tools and equipment. The impromptu staging point was now a critical node in the defense of the eastern sector. Then came the next blow. A message crackled over Mia's handheld radio. One of the deputies assigned to traffic control at the community entrance reported that Karen had attempted to block Cal Fire's incoming water tender convoy, insisting they had no authority to access certain private easements. The dispatcher's voice was sharp. "Advise all units, disregard HOA interference, full authority under emergency declaration." Mia clenched her jaw. This was beyond negligence now. It was active obstruction. She relayed the information to Chief Latham, who responded with chilling clarity. "Understood. If necessary, we will remove those obstacles." The fire's advance continued, but the eastern line held, thanks largely to the orchard tank. By dawn, exhausted but resolute, Mia stood beside the Cal Fire crew chief, surveying the smoke-blackened hills. "You bought them a window," he said quietly. But the danger wasn't over. Forecasts called for renewed winds by mid-morning, and several structures on the upper ridge remained at risk. Mia returned to her property briefly, checking on her own home and grabbing additional supplies. The slope behind the house was scorched from ember fallout, but the defensible space had held. Her brother's old fire-resistant shutters remained intact, a small consolation. Then came another call, this time from her attorney. "Mia, you need to be aware. Karen filed an emergency injunction this morning, claiming you violated community covenants by staging unauthorized fire operations on HOA property." The absurdity of it was staggering. Mia had risked her safety to help stabilize the fire front, and now Karen was attempting to weaponize procedural technicalities against her. "We'll fight it," the attorney assured her, "but it's clear she's trying to shift blame preemptively." Mia's response was calm but cold. "Get everything documented. I'll send you the Cal Fire logs. They have full authority under state law. She knew that public opinion would soon turn, especially as word spread about the hydrant failures and the board's obstruction. Meanwhile, more disturbing details emerged. Conversations with the incoming water tender crews revealed that several other neighborhoods had successfully maintained private water reserves, precisely the kind of system that Mia's brother had built and that Karen had dismantled. The contrast was stark. In those communities, firefighting efforts had been more effective, property losses minimized. Here, thanks to short-sighted cost-cutting and vanity-driven decisions, the eastern flank had nearly collapsed. As morning light broke fully, the extent of the damage became visible. The lower canyon was a smoldering ruin. Several homes along the south ridge had been lost overnight. The eastern sector, held only by the Orchard Tank staging point, had survived, though several properties bore heavy scorch marks. Residents began returning cautiously, many unaware of how close they had come to catastrophe. Paul, Dan, and several others gathered at the orchard site to assist with cleanup and equipment breakdown. Mia briefed them on the situation. "We're not out of it yet. The winds could shift again. We need to stay ready." Then came the inevitable confrontation. Karen arrived at the site mid-morning, dressed impeccably despite the chaos, accompanied by a junior board member and a private security officer. Her tone was icy. "Ms. Taylor, you've grossly exceeded your authority. This operation was unauthorized, and you've exposed the association to potential liability." Mia met her gaze without flinching. "I acted under direct coordination with CAL FIRE. Under a declared emergency, their authority supersedes all local covenants." She gestured toward the CAL FIRE engine still idling nearby. "You can take it up with them." Karen's mask cracked for an instant, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, but she recovered quickly. "Legal action will proceed." With that, she turned and strode away. Mia exhaled slowly. The legal battle would come, but for now, survival remained the priority. The forecast winds had begun to pick up again, and the fire perimeter was still unstable. She checked her phone, another message from Latham. "Prepare for possible flare-ups. Crews redeploying. Stay safe." And so, the battle entered its next phase. The community was waking up to the consequences of choices made in boardrooms and on paper, where aesthetics had trumped function and where arrogance had nearly cost lives. Mia knew that when the flames finally receded, there would be reckoning. But first, there was another day to fight through. She gathered her gear and prepared to return to the front. The winds arrived earlier than predicted. By late morning, they were gusting erratically through the canyons, whipping embers high into the air and driving fresh spot fires ahead of the main front. Mia stood once more at the orchard staging area, her radio clipped to her belt, listening intently to the constant stream of CAL FIRE communications. The mood had shifted. Where there had been cautious optimism at dawn, now there was a grim edge to every voice on the channel. Multiple flare-ups had already been reported along the southeast perimeter, and containment lines to the west were under severe strain. The crews at the orchard tank worked without pause, refilling engines and supporting the portable suppression units now deployed along the vulnerable eastern ridge. Paul and Dan remained on site, helping to coordinate logistics. More volunteers had arrived as word of the situation spread, residents who now understood how close their community had come to total disaster during the night. Among them were several younger homeowners, many of whom had initially supported the association's cosmetic mandates, now visibly shaken by the stark reality of wildfire behavior. By noon, a new crisis emerged. Reports came in that several key access roads into the neighborhood were becoming compromised. Fallen branches, downed power lines, and localized spot fires were creating choke points. Evacuation orders escalated to Tier 3 in outlying sectors, and law enforcement began moving to enforce mandatory departures in zones closest to the advancing flames. Mia knew that if those access roads failed completely, the remaining defense efforts would be cut off. She immediately relayed the situation to Chief Latham, who responded with a terse directive. "We're deploying dozer teams to reopen critical lanes. Hold the east sector. Prioritize mobility." At that moment, another message came through. Karen had summoned a private construction crew, attempting to erect a temporary barricade at one of the side easements leading to the orchard staging area, claiming it was to prevent liability exposure. The obstruction was not only illegal under the active emergency declaration, but it also threatened to isolate the very operations keeping the eastern flank stable. Mia's patience finally snapped. She radioed directly to the CAL Fire Incident Command and then drove to the easement herself. What she found was infuriating. A small team of workers, clearly uncomfortable, stacking concrete barriers under the direction of one of Karen's junior board members. Mia exited her truck, identification badge visible, and confronted them. "This is an active fire zone under state command. Your actions are interfering with emergency operations. Cease immediately." The workers hesitated, visibly nervous. Before they could respond, a KL Fire Liaison unit arrived, lights flashing. The lead officer stepped forward and formally ordered the cessation of the obstruction under penalty of arrest. The workers quickly complied and began dismantling the barricade, the board member retreating in visible frustration. Back at the orchard site, the situation remained precarious. Embers now rained intermittently, forcing periodic halts in operations to suppress spot ignitions. The portable pump continued to perform, though its capacity was nearing limits under the sustained demand. Mia coordinated with the crew chief to implement a rotation strategy, cycling engines through the staging point while maintaining reserve capacity for sudden flare-ups. Then came an unexpected development. A senior CAL Fire logistics officer arrived with news. An additional water tender convoy had been cleared for the eastern sector, rerouted from a neighboring district where the fire threat had eased. This would double the resupply capacity at the orchard site, potentially stabilizing the defense line for the next critical window. Mia worked swiftly to coordinate staging for the incoming units, clearing space and briefing the volunteers. As the new tenders arrived and operations resumed at increased capacity, there was a tangible shift in morale. The expanded resources offered a fighting chance against the worsening conditions. For the first time in hours, the line seemed to hold with confidence. Yet Mia remained acutely aware that the situation could turn again in an instant. Amid the organized chaos, a CAL Fire investigator approached Mia privately. He had been reviewing the incident reports regarding the dismantled water systems and the attempted obstructions. "We've got enough here for a formal inquiry," he said quietly. "This isn't just poor judgment anymore. It's actionable interference. You should prepare for statements and documentation." Mia nodded grimly. "Everything's logged. We'll cooperate fully." Meanwhile, news of the fire's progression began reaching the broader public. Media helicopters now circled at a distance, their cameras capturing the smoke-plumed skyline. The regional emergency alert system issued updates, urging residents in adjacent zones to remain prepared for possible evacuations. Among the returning residents and volunteers at the orchard site, conversations buzzed with growing anger towards the association's leadership, particularly as the role of the disabled water systems became more widely known. By late afternoon, a slight shift in wind patterns offered a brief reprieve. The most aggressive fire fronts slowed, allowing containment crews to strengthen key lines. The orchard staging point remained operational, having served as a critical anchor through the worst of the day's assaults. Mia took a brief moment to catch her breath, reviewing the deployment maps with the CAL Fire crew chief. The fight was far from over, but for now, the eastern sector had held. Yet even in that moment of fragile stability, the next phase of the battle loomed. Mia's phone buzzed with a new message from her attorney. Board just filed preliminary claims for property damage related to unauthorized emergency actions. We're preparing countersuit based on interference and gross negligence. Stay ready. Mia's expression hardened. The legal war was clearly underway. But for now, her focus remained on the ground, on the fire, on the community, and on the fight to protect what could still be saved. The brief lull provided by the late afternoon wind shift did not last long. By early evening, atmospheric instability triggered by the day's heat began generating erratic gusts and localized whirlwinds. The fire's perimeter, though temporarily checked in some sectors, surged again in others. Crews rotated in shifts, fatigue evident in every movement, while radio chatter remained constant. At the Orchard staging area, Mia continued coordinating with CAL FIRE units, her presence now fully integrated into the operational flow. Paul and Dan had returned after brief rest, reinforcing the volunteer team. The additional water tenders brought earlier remained critical, sustaining engine operations as new flare-ups were reported along the northeastern ridge. Then came a disturbing update. A CAL Fire Division supervisor relayed that structural losses in the southern portion of the neighborhood had reached critical levels. Over a dozen homes confirmed destroyed, several others heavily damaged. Among the casualties were properties whose owners had relied solely on the association's assurances of adequate hydrant coverage. Word of these losses spread quickly through both official channels and personal networks, fueling mounting anger among residents now fully aware of how badly the water system had failed. Conversations at the Orchard site grew increasingly pointed. "They lied to us," one volunteer muttered. "They told everyone the upgrades were more than sufficient." Mia remained focused on immediate priorities but understood that the political ramifications of the disaster were beginning to take shape. The association's leadership had gambled on aesthetics and cost savings, and the consequences were now burning across the hillsides for all to see. Her phone buzzed again, another message from her attorney. Media inquiries starting. County Legal Counsel is reviewing potential criminal liability for obstruction of emergency operations. Stay on record with CAL FIRE. As twilight deepened, spot fires began creeping dangerously close to the eastern containment line. The Orchard tank continued to supply engines, but pump fatigue was becoming a factor. Mia coordinated with the CAL FIRE logistics officer to cycle in backup equipment. Simultaneously, they worked to establish an auxiliary relay line from a secondary water source identified earlier in the day. A municipal valve station at the far end of an older, partially decommissioned irrigation system. Activation required manual override, a task complicated by damaged infrastructure and the need to navigate a maze of outdated schematics. Without hesitation, Mia volunteered to assist the CAL fire technicians, her background in emergency systems management proving invaluable. Together, they located the valve station and assessed its condition. While portions of the system were in disrepair, the main line remained intact. After a tense hour of effort, during which shifting winds repeatedly forced retreat from advancing embers, the team succeeded in bringing the auxiliary line online, providing a secondary feed to the Orchard staging point. The timing proved critical. Minutes after flow was established, a sudden gust front drove a new wave of embers over the containment line, igniting multiple spot fires within the defensive perimeter. Engines surged into action, drawing heavily from both the primary tank and the newly activated auxiliary line. Mia worked side by side with the CAL fire crew, directing hose teams and monitoring pump operations. The effort was grueling, the air thick with smoke and heat, but gradually the spot fires were beaten back. Meanwhile, chaos continued elsewhere. Reports filtered in that Cairn and several remaining board members were attempting to convene an emergency leadership meeting at the community clubhouse. Despite active evacuation orders and the clear reality that the association's role in managing the crisis was now legally and operationally irrelevant. More troubling were indications that Cairn had begun contacting external legal counsel and public relations firms, likely in an attempt to control the narrative and shield herself from mounting liability. At the Orchard site, tempers among the volunteers flared as news of these actions spread. Several residents, their homes still threatened or already lost, openly discussed confronting Karen directly. Mia counseled caution. "The time for accountability will come," she told them. "Right now, we protect what we can." The night deepened, the fire's glow painting the horizon in ominous hues. Despite exhaustion, the defense held. By midnight, containment in the eastern sector had stabilized, though the situation remained fluid. Mia allowed herself a brief moment of respite, reviewing operational logs with the CAL FIRE liaison. "You and your people made the difference here," the officer said quietly. "Without this staging point, we'd have lost the entire ridge." Gratitude was tempered by grim awareness. The community had survived this phase of the assault, but the broader disaster was far from over. And beneath the surface, a second battle was brewing, one that would soon move from the fire lines to courtrooms and public hearings. At dawn, as operations shifted into recovery and assessment mode, Mia returned home briefly to check her property. The house stood, scorched but intact. The area where her brother's tank fittings had been was a blackened scar, a silent testament to what had been lost and what might have been saved had the system remained operational. Fatigue weighed heavily, but there was no time for reflection. Another message from her attorney awaited. Breaking. County Sheriff's Office launching formal investigation into HOA actions. Obstruction charges possible. Be prepared to provide full documentation. Simultaneously, the first media reports began appearing. Drone footage showed the devastation across the neighborhood. Stark contrasts between areas protected by effective suppression efforts and those where systems had failed. The role of the Orchard staging point was highlighted in several reports, along with emerging details about the dismantled private water infrastructure. Public outrage swelled rapidly. Then came a final act of desperation from Karen. Early that morning, she filed an emergency motion in county court seeking a temporary restraining order against Mia, alleging unauthorized commandeering of private resources and endangerment of community property. The motion was clearly a preemptive legal maneuver designed to deflect scrutiny and intimidate. Mia's attorney moved swiftly, filing a countersuit supported by CAL FIRE's official incident reports and sworn statements from responding officers. By midday, the court summarily denied Karen's motion, citing overriding state emergency authority and clear evidence of public benefit from Mia's actions. Simultaneously, county officials announced the formation of a special task force to investigate the HOA's conduct during the crisis. Karen's public position crumbled further as multiple residents came forward with statements detailing the association's misrepresentations and obstructionist behavior. As the legal and political dimensions of the disaster unfolded, Mia remained focused on the immediate work of recovery. Alongside CAL FIRE crews and community volunteers, she helped assess damage, coordinate relief efforts, and begin the long process of stabilizing the devastated zones. Throughout it all, her resolve never wavered. The fight to protect her community, and to hold those responsible for its failures to account, was far from over. But for the first time in days, there was a sense of momentum, of justice beginning to assert itself amid the ashes. In the days that followed the peak of the firestorm, the smoke began to thin, revealing a landscape both battered and eerily silent. The eastern ridge stood scarred but largely intact. Its survival owed in no small part to the emergency staging point Mia had helped establish. The southern portions of the neighborhood were not so fortunate. Entire blocks had been reduced to blackened shells, their skeletal remains a grim testament to the consequences of failed infrastructure and misguided priorities. The official damage assessments proceeded rapidly. County inspectors, accompanied by CAL FIRE representatives, documented extensive failures in the neighborhood's water distribution system. The association's cost-saving contract had not only reduced water pressure during critical periods, but had also left key hydrants disconnected from backup sources. The legal implications were staggering. Mia, though physically and emotionally drained, remained fully engaged. She worked closely with CAL FIRE investigators, providing detailed accounts of the sequence of events, the state of the dismantled tank, and the obstruction attempts led by Karen and other board members. Her documentation was meticulous. Radio logs, photographs, witness statements, all corroborated by official incident reports. County legal counsel moved swiftly, opening formal inquiries into the HOA's conduct. Criminal charges for obstruction of emergency operations were now on the table. Amid this unfolding legal storm, Karen's position deteriorated rapidly. Public opinion had turned decisively against her as media coverage highlighted the contrast between communities that had maintained functional firefighting infrastructure and those, like this neighborhood, where vanity and cost-cutting had left. Residents dangerously exposed. The Orchard staging point became a focal point of this narrative, a symbol of grassroots action and competence in the face of institutional failure. Mia's role, while not something she had sought to publicize, inevitably came to light as reporters and residents alike sought to understand how the eastern sector had been saved. Then came a decisive moment. The County Board of Supervisors scheduled an emergency public hearing to address the disaster response and the role of local governance structures. The hearing would be open to residents and the media, with testimony from CAL FIRE, county officials, and affected citizens. It was clear that this would be a reckoning for the HOA leadership. In preparation, Mia met with her attorney and CAL FIRE's legal liaison. "Stay factual," they advised. "You have the truth on your side. Let the evidence speak." The day of the hearing arrived under a pale, smoke-stained sky. The county chambers were packed. Residents, media crews, legal observers. Karen arrived with the legal counsel in tow, her composure visibly strained. The mood in the room was electric with suppressed anger and anticipation. The hearing opened with a stark briefing from CAL FIRE representatives. Maps displayed on large screens showed the progression of the fire, the points of containment, and the critical role of the Orchard staging area. The lead investigator detailed the impact of the dismantled water systems and the failed hydrant network. "These decisions materially degraded the community's fire defense capabilities," he stated bluntly. "Lives and property were placed at unnecessary risk." Mia was called to testify next. Calm and composed, she recounted the sequence of events, her efforts to coordinate with CAL FIRE, the obstruction attempts she had witnessed, and the condition of her brother's dismantled tank. Her testimony was precise, supported by extensive documentation. The supervisors listened intently, several visibly appalled. When questioned about her motivations, Mia answered simply, "I did what needed to be done to protect my neighbors and this community. The systems that should have been in place were not, and in their absence, we adapted." Karen's defense followed, a faltering attempt to deflect responsibility, citing legal interpretations of property covenants and alleged procedural ambiguities. Her counsel argued that the board had acted in good faith based on legal advice. But this narrative unraveled quickly under questioning. County legal counsel presented evidence of Karen's direct involvement in ordering the dismantling of the tank and attempting to block CAL FIRE access. The supervisors pressed hard, their tone increasingly pointed. "You prioritized aesthetics over life safety," one supervisor stated bluntly. "That is unacceptable." As the hearing concluded, the county board announced immediate actions. A formal referral to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges was issued. A special oversight committee would be established to review all HOA governance practices in the county's fire-prone areas. Furthermore, the HOA's current leadership was to be suspended pending further investigation. The room erupted in subdued but palpable approval. In the days that followed, the consequences continued to unfold. Karen resigned under pressure, facing both civil litigation and the looming threat of criminal prosecution. Several other board members followed suit. The community, still reeling from the disaster, began to organize anew. Residents who had previously remained passive now demanded transparency and accountability. Mia, while declining any formal leadership role, agreed to serve as an advisor to the Emerging Recovery Committee, her expertise and steady presence widely respected. Through it all, Mia remained clear-eyed. The fight was far from over. Legal proceedings would take time, and the process of rebuilding would be arduous. But the truth had been established and a dangerous precedent had been shattered. No longer would superficial concerns be allowed to trump life safety in this community. And as the hills slowly began to heal, green shoots emerging from the blackened earth, so too did a new sense of purpose take root among the residents. A commitment to ensuring that such failures would never again be repeated. In the weeks that followed the public hearing, the neighborhood remained in a state of uneasy transition. The physical scars of the fire were everywhere: charred tree trunks, blackened slopes, the skeletal remains of homes that once stood as monuments to suburban security. Yet, beneath the visible devastation, another transformation was underway. The resignation of Karen and several board members had left a power vacuum in the association's leadership, one that residents were determined not to fill with more of the same. Informal meetings gave way to organized forums, where for the first time in years, a genuine sense of community engagement began to emerge. Mia attended these sessions not as a leader, but as a trusted advisor. Her role forged not by political ambition but by the clarity and resolve she had demonstrated during the crisis. Her presence brought a grounding influence to discussions that might otherwise have veered into anger and recrimination. Legal proceedings moved forward steadily. The district attorney's office confirmed that obstruction charges against Karen and 2 other board members were being prepared, supported by a growing body of evidence. Civil suits filed by affected homeowners also advanced, with several law firms citing Mia's detailed documentation as a foundation for their cases. The media coverage remained intense, but as the initial wave of outrage subsided, a more thoughtful narrative took hold. One focused on resilience, accountability, and the lessons to be drawn from the disaster. Meanwhile, Mia worked closely with the newly formed Recovery Committee. Her expertise in emergency systems proved invaluable as the group drafted proposals for infrastructure upgrades, revised governance practices, and long-term fire mitigation strategies. Among the first priorities was the restoration and expansion of private water reserves. The remains of her brother's dismantled tank were salvaged, and plans for a new, larger capacity system were approved with broad community support. Moreover, provisions were established to ensure that no future board could override or dismantle critical safety infrastructure without a transparent, multi-agency review. As reconstruction efforts gained momentum, Mia also found herself reconnecting with neighbors in ways that had never seemed possible before. Shared adversity had forged unexpected bonds, erasing many of the old divisions that had once defined the neighborhood's social landscape. Casual conversations at the Orchard staging site evolved into lasting friendships. Paul, Dan, and several other volunteers became trusted collaborators in the ongoing work of recovery. New leadership candidates emerged, individuals committed to transparency, accountability, and genuine community service. One particularly significant moment came during a county-sponsored community safety workshop. Mia was invited to speak on a panel addressing best practices in wildfire resilience. Her remarks were candid and pragmatic, focused on the hard-earned lessons of recent events. Preparedness is not just about equipment or protocols, she told the audience. It's about a mindset, a willingness to prioritize life safety over convenience or appearance. We failed at that once. We won't do so again. Her words resonated deeply. In the months that followed, the neighborhood's new governance structures took shape with a clear mandate to institutionalize the hard lessons learned. The revised charter included mandatory annual reviews of emergency infrastructure, transparent budget processes, and community-wide drills coordinated directly with CAL Fire and County Emergency Management. Mia continued to serve in an advisory capacity, declining formal office but remaining an ever-present resource. Her experience and integrity were widely recognized, not only within the neighborhood but also among county officials and CAL FIRE leadership. As spring approached, the first signs of renewal appeared on the land. Native grasses began to green the slopes, and wildflowers pushed through the blackened soil. Reconstruction of damaged homes progressed steadily, guided by updated fire-resistant design standards. The orchard tank, now rebuilt to modern specifications, stood as a symbol of the community's resilience, a reminder of what had been risked, lost, and ultimately reclaimed. For Mia, the journey had been both exhausting and transformative. She had never sought to become a public figure, nor had she aspired to leadership. Yet through necessity and conviction, she had helped steer her community through its darkest hours. The road ahead remained long, and the threat of future fires would never fully disappear. But the foundations for a safer, more accountable neighborhood had been laid, not by decree, but through the collective will of residents determined to learn, adapt, and protect what mattered most. And so, as the seasons turned and the land slowly healed, so too did the spirit of the community. Not with fanfare or ceremony, but with quiet determination and a shared understanding that vigilance, integrity, and resilience would define their future far more than any facade of aesthetic perfection ever could.